أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. صلى الله عليك يا رسول الله. صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله. يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة ويا عبرة كل مؤمن ومؤمنة يا ليتنا كنا معكم سادتي فنفوز فوزا عظيما. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قال رب السجن أحب إلي مما يدعونني إليه. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. In every country, there are jails. There's something called incarceration. You won't find a single country on this planet that doesn't have jails. They might not have other aspects of life, but there has to be a jail in every country, in every society, in every community. Why? What's the need for jails? In order to have a peaceful society, a safe country, there needs to be a punishment. There needs to be jail in order to have law-abiding citizens. Otherwise, if a country doesn't have prisons, that means that country is a jungle. There would be chaos. There'd be murder. There'd be theft. There'd be arson. There'd be sexual assault. There'd be people breaking the law right and left. Why? Because there's no punishment. There's no prison. There's no fear of being punished. White-collar crimes, blue-collar crimes, you name it. There'd be chaos. Life in the jungle. Speeding under the influence. Speeding itself is a crime. Driving under the influence is a crime of its own. Driving and drinking in the United States of America kills 28 people every day. Every single day. That is approximately one person every 52 minutes. In the United States of America, they die because of driving and drinking, DUIs, driving under the influence. Imagine, this is only one country where this is the amount of deaths because of this crime, this murderous crime. That is more than 10,000 lives lost because some people are drunk and then they go driving. As for speeding, in the year 2020, in the United States of America alone, over 11,000 people were killed because people were reckless. They were speeding when driving. Although these crimes, and these are crimes that everyone performs, you don't have to be a master criminal to speed on the freeways and on the roads. You don't have to be a mastermind criminal in order to drive under the influence of alcohol. These are things that are done by everyone, right? Although these crimes exist, but knowing that there's jail, knowing that you could go to prison, it obviously reduces the amount of these crimes. Imagine with all of these crimes taking place and there was no jail and there was no prison, all of these crimes would be multiplied, whether it was murder or theft or arson or robbery or assault. They would all double. Knowing that there's a jail and a prison reduces the amount of these crimes. Knowing that there's a jail and a prison for criminals, it helps you and me sleep at night. We sleep better, feeling safer that criminals will have to do the time. They perform crimes, they will have to do the time. Having said that, in America, in the United States of America alone, we spend $52 to $60 billion on prisons and jails. Do you know what a big amount that is? $60 billion. Here in Canada, I'll give you some statistics from here in Canada. The total public spending on the criminal justice system in Canada per year is $20 billion on the criminal justice system. That is equivalent to $550 that each and every single one of you is paying in taxes every year. When you go shopping, when you fill up your car in gas, the amount of tax that you're paying, approximately it adds up to $550 per person, not per family, per person in taxes. Going where? To construction of roads? No. To building of hospitals and schools and universities? No. To jails and prisons. This money is being spent on criminals in jails and prisons. طيب. Your health department here in Canada, their annual budget is $3 billion. While the money spent on the criminal justice system is $20 billion. طيب. Your average prisoner, your average criminal in prison, do you know how much this country spends per year on a prisoner? A criminal in jail? $115,000 per year. $115,000. Here in Canada, not in the United States. Here in Canada, you're spending $115,000 on every prisoner, on every criminal. Do you know what amount this is? If you like to go to Harvard, the best university on the planet, the annual tuition for Harvard is $45,000. So you're paying approximately triple the amount on one prisoner for 1 year. Imagine that. Here in Canada, the average income per household, this is a statistic from 2015. The average income for an average household here in Canada is $70,000, right? For a single individual, the average income is $27,000. If you're a female single parent, your average income here in Canada is $39,000, right? As a single parent female. But a prisoner is making $115,000 in this country. This tells you that you're better off living in prison. You think you're happy living in Richmond or in Coquitlam or any of those areas here in Vancouver. If you'd be living in a prison, you'd be making more, right? What does Islam say about jails and incarceration? Did the prophets and imams ever jail anyone? Do jails exist in Islam? Do we have a prison system in Islam or not? Do prisoners in Islam have rights? Even those who went for a legitimate reason, they committed a crime, but do they have rights? Tonight, we will discuss the following points, inshallah. Number one, the first prison in Islam. What was it and who built it? Number two, is there a jail in Islam? According to our literature from the Ahlulbayt, is there jail time for certain criminals or for certain crimes? Number three, the rights of prisoners in Islam. Number four, what is the purpose of jail? What is the purpose of prison? Why put people in jail? What is the purpose and goal? Number five, the problem with prisons in the West. Prisons in the West, whether we're talking about Canada or the United States, Europe, the UK, Australia, there's a major problem. There's a major problem with these jails and prisons. In addition to the fact that we're spending billions of dollars, and you and I, we're spending our tax money. Some say, why are we talking about jails? I'll tell you why, because I'm spending from my own pocket. And you're spending from your pocket, and you're spending from your pocket. Thus, shouldn't we have a say in how prisons and jails are run in this country? And of course, we will try to offer solutions, not just pinpoint the problems, but offer solutions. And finally, number 6, we will discuss some great individuals who were imprisoned unjustly, oppressively. They were incarcerated oppressively. وَصَلُّوا عَلَى مُحَمَّدٍ وَآلِ مُحَمَّدٍ. According to historians, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam did have jails. He would imprison. Of course, jails came in at a later time, but there was imprisonment at the time of Rasulullah. He would imprison prisoners of war in the homes of the Sahaba. Regular Sahaba. They would stay in the homes of the Sahaba. They were fed. The homes were protected. It wasn't too hot. It wasn't too cold. It wasn't a bad environment. Rasulullah would put prisoners of war in the homes of his Sahaba. They would be divided. And these were comfortable homes. They felt almost at home. Unfortunately, the khulafa that came after, excluding Amir al-Mu'mineen, because we'll talk about that. The khulafa that came, the rulers, they would imprison in wells, water wells. Imagine, there's a well 20 meters deep, full of water. They'd imprison people in those wells, deep in those wells, until Amir al-Mu'mineen came. Amir al-Mu'mineen said, no, what are you doing? Imprisoning people in wells of water? That's torture. And in Islam, there's no such thing as torture. And he built the first prison. The first prison in Islam was built by Imam Ali alayhi salam, by Amir al-Mu'mineen. And they were comfortable. There was no torture in the prisons of Amir al-Mu'mineen. The first prison that he built, it was called Nafi'ah. And then he built another prison called Makhisa. But there were comfortable places without torture. طيب. Now, we have narrations by the Ahlulbayt regarding jail, regarding certain crimes that are performed by people that deserve jail time. We have narrations by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We have narrations by Imam al-Sadiq, by Imam al-Baqir, and they themselves would jail. Yes, at the time of Rasulullah, certain individuals were put in prison. At the time of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, of course, there was a difference between the time of Rasulullah and Amir al-Mu'mineen. At the time of Amir al-Mu'mineen was at the head of the state, and the state had expanded, and his resources were a lot more than the resources at the time of Rasulullah. But there were jails, and he built the first jail. There were several instances in which Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, he jailed. He put certain individuals in jail. What are these crimes that are agreed upon in both Shia Islam and in Sunni Islam, that if you perform them, you deserve jail in Islam? I've gathered a couple of cases and scenarios, and there's narrations from both schools of thought, but because we are running out of time, I won't have time to read to you each and every single narration, although I've gathered. If you'd like, after the lecture, come to me and I'll read you those narrations, and I've even categorized those narrations according to their authenticity. How weak is the chain of narrators? Anyhow, so for example, if you're accused of murder, we have narrations that say you will be jailed. Rasulullah would jail a person who was accused of murder for 6 days. If the accuser can bring forth evidence and proof that the person being accused did perform murder, khalas, he'd go to jail. Either life imprisonment or execution. But if they did not have sufficient proof and evidence, after 6 days, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would release that person who was held. Of course, these 6 days he would be taken care of. He would be taken care of. It's not that he was held hostage and he was beaten and he was tortured or he was forced to confess. No, none of that. This is one. Another instance is robbery. In some cases, because this requires a lecture of its own, that in Islam, thieves, their hands are cut. Is it just that, for example, someone who steals gum or lipstick, their hands are cut? Of course not. It's not as simple as that. There are strict rules that if this person was provided for by the government, there's a welfare system, and this person was provided for, yet this person had, was still not full, still wanted more, has greed, and he wanted more, then that's another story. Then this person is not in need. If a person steals out of need because he's hungry or he's providing for a hungry family, this person is not punished in Islam. The one who's punished is the Islamic government, the governor, for not providing for every single citizen. Right? So there's rules and conditions to that punishment in Islam for thieves. If a person steals once and his hand is cut off, and he steals twice and the other hand is cut off, again, according to the circumstances that are mentioned in Islam books, the third time he goes to prison, and it could be life in imprisonment. Number 3, a person who repeatedly performs adultery. This person needs to be put in prison. The ordering of the murder of someone. If you order someone to kill another person, you have life imprisonment. The person who actually kills will be executed, capital punishment. But the one who orders, according to some narrations in Scripture, he will receive life imprisonment. Helping to murder someone in Islam, being an accessory to murder, you'll receive life imprisonment. طيب. He who refuses to spend on his wife. Amir al-Mu'mineen, one day a woman came to him and she told him that my husband refuses to spend on me while he has money. He has the money, but he refuses. He wishes to harm me. Amir al-Mu'mineen imprisoned him. He put him in jail. Let this be a lesson to the husbands who don't spend on their wives. If a wife claims that her husband has divorced her, and she brings 2 witnesses or 1 witness, but he denies, he says, no, I never divorced her. In some cases, he could be jailed. Because he has witnesses that are saying he divorced her, but he's saying no. He just flat out denies it. We have a hadith says that this person can go to jail. A corrupt governor, the governor of Basra, the governor of Kufa, for example, they go corrupt. They embezzle money. They take public money and they spend it on themselves, on their family members. They buy land. This person needs to go to jail. And we have cases in which Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, he jailed some of his corrupt governors. Of course, he had not appointed those governors. Those governors were appointed by the ones before him. He came and he put them in jail. Imagine if today in some of our countries like Iraq and in Lebanon and some of these countries where we actually punish these corrupt politicians, governors, parliament members, ministers, prime ministers, we would end corruption. We wouldn't have corruption in these countries anymore. Why do we have corruption in these countries? Because the criminals are not being punished. They're not doing the time. They're not going to jail, and hence they keep on doing what they do. There are other cases that can cause the criminal to be jailed according to our ahadith. For example, making false accusations about people, the use of magic, apostasy, drinking, using intoxicants in public. Not what you do in your private life, that's something else. But you come out in public and you use intoxicants. Spies, those who spy in favor of another country, over the Islamic country. These are all, they can go to jail in Islam. Of course, my dear brothers and sisters, keep in note that this topic is a juristic topic. It has to be dealt with by jurists. Some of the cases that I mentioned to you, they might have a weak narration, according to some ulama, while another alim would accept these narrations. Thus, it depends on ijtihad, it depends on the authority of the jurist. These narrations, we can't take them for face value. They have to be dealt with by jurists. Some of them might have an opposing narration. These narrations might not be applicable at all times and in all places. We have to read their context and see when Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, if he jailed someone for a certain crime, why did he do it, in what context did he do it, and so on and so forth. For example, apostasy. Some narrations tell us that apostasy is a crime punishable by law. You could go to jail. But what is apostasy? What is apostasy? That is up to the jurists to decide according to their ijtihad. Is apostasy simply the rejection of Islam, to say that I am no longer a Muslim? Is that apostasy? Al-ridda, al-irtidad? Or is it claiming not to be a Muslim and bearing arms and carrying arms, starting a violent movement against Islam? And some scholars, they say this is al-ridda, this is al-irtidad. This is the apostasy that is punishable by crime. Again, this goes back to the jurists and what they understand from the narrations. So this is a very sensitive topic, and we leave it to the jurists. And it goes without saying that it is not meant to be applied here in Canada or the United States of America or Europe. It is meant to be applied in a fully Islamic state. When all of the conditions are met, a truly Islamic state, these laws can be applied in such a circumstance. وصلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Now, prisons exist in Islam. They've existed from the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Or imprisonment existed from the time of Rasulullah, but the first jail was established by Amir al-Mu'mineen. So prisons existed, but so too did prisoners' rights. Prisoners have rights in Islam, and those rights should not be ignored. They should be respected and upheld. A contemporary scholar, a Shaykh Najmuddin al-Tabasi, who is a respected scholar living in Qom today, he has a book on the rights of prisoners in Islam. If you read Arabic, I advise you to look up that book and check it out. It's a good book, and he does a comparison between Shia theology and Sunni theology, and what our scholars have to say, what Sunni scholars have to say regarding jail, prisons, and the right of prisoners in Islam. So some of the rights that he mentions is that prisoners have the right to see their family members in jail if they ask to do so. A prisoner has the right to have privacy with his wife, or the other way around. A wife can have the right to privacy with her husband, with her husband in jail. The right to practice your religion freely in jail, that is a right. The right to expedite your trial. For some, they throw their trial in 2025. No. One of your rights is that you could expedite your trial. You cannot be tortured in jail. This is one of the rights of prisoners. Men and women should be separated in jail. You cannot mix men and women, especially for hijab reasons. That is amongst the rights. Now, when I was doing research for this lecture, and I was trying to see who has written about rights of prisoners in Islam, I saw that Al-Marhum, Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad al-Shirazi, rahmatullah alayh, has written extensively on this topic. And I assume that he wrote about this towards the end of his life, maybe in the late 1990s. And he has a whole list, and you can find this online on his website. A list of prisoner rights in Islam. And when you read this, you're astonished, subhanAllah. Islam gives all of these rights to prisoners. Indeed, Islam is a humanitarian religion. Especially when you compare those rights to the rights that exist in these countries, in the United States and in Canada, in the West in general, that speak of human rights. See what Islam says first, and then we'll see who's truly fighting for human rights. So for example, and I'll go over them quickly because there is a lot, and I've summarized these rights for you. So for example, if a prisoner has students, those students may come to him in jail to learn. The prisoner has the right to seek medical treatment, has the right to be taken to a hospital. The prisoner has the right to ask for whatever makes him or her, of course. When I say him, I mean him or her, mentally and psychologically comfortable in jail. If the prisoner is a female, she could ask for a special place for her in jail. If she is pregnant, she has the right to ask for medical attention and to deliver in a hospital. She can see her kids in prison and take care of them in prison. A prisoner has the right to have a lawyer and a translator. And if he or she cannot afford one, then the government should provide him or her one. No solitary confinement in Islam. You put a prisoner in solitary confinement for 6 months where he can't tell the difference between day and night, where he sees no one for 6 months. This doesn't exist in Islam. There's no solitary confinement in Islam. No torture whatsoever in jail in Islam. No to chains. No to being held in dark places. Cannot take confession by force in Islam. Even if it's the biggest criminal, you cannot take his or her confession by force. They have to give their confession voluntarily. طيب. Prisoner has the right to complain about his or her treatment in jail at any time. Prisoner can call and contact his family members whenever he or she likes. Guards have no right to listen to their conversations between the prisoner and their family members. Cannot put a glass wall between the prisoner and his family members when they come and visit them. And this is something that exists in most jails and most prisons in the West. There's a glass wall. You can't touch, you can't hug, you can't embrace your family members. This is not Islamic. Prisoner can have access to the news, newspapers, magazines, radio, TV. A prisoner can have access to a library. Must provide a prisoner with any book he or she wants. And if he or she cannot afford it, it should be provided for him or her. A prisoner could have a copy of the Quran and a book of dua. A prisoner may practice his religious duties freely. If a prisoner needs a religious scholar, it should be provided for him in jail. If a prisoner would like to pray in congregation, he may do so. And the list goes on, my dear brothers and sisters. Iftar and suhoor should be provided to the prisoner. If he has not gone to Hajj, he may go to Hajj by paying ransom first. If the prisoner has made nadr to perform ziyarah, he may go and perform ziyarah, leave prison and go to ziyarah, as long as he has a kafil, someone that promises that this prisoner will come back to jail. Non-Muslims can practice their religion freely in Islamic jails. Prisoner may attend important religious ceremonies outside of prison. So during the month of Muharram, if a prisoner is in prison, he may come and attend majalis. He or she has the right to do so. They may attend funerals and weddings, pending that they have a kafil, someone that promises this person will come back to jail. A prisoner may choose his city of prison. Baghdad, Basra. I would obviously choose Vancouver. Shannon Falls to be exact. You may choose. Prisoner may choose to be imprisoned at home if he promises or she promises that they won't leave the house. And so on and so forth. I could go on. The Sayyid lists so many, over 60 or 70 rights to prisoners. This is Islam. This comes from only one jurist in Islam, from the school of thought of Ahlulbayt. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. طيب. What is the purpose of incarceration? Why do we have jails? As I said in the beginning of the lecture, you won't find a country in the world that doesn't have jails. They all have jails. They all have incarceration. What is the purpose? What is the ultimate goal and purpose behind incarceration? There are 5 goals. Number 1, the protection of society. How do you protect the people from criminals? How will the people feel safe if you don't have jails? If you don't have jails, the murderer will commit murder again. Someone who committed assault will go and commit assault again. How do you protect the people? By taking the criminal and putting him or her in jail. By securing a safe society so that the drug dealer doesn't do drugs again or deals again, so that the thief doesn't steal again, and so on and so forth. This is 1. Number 2, jails serve as a deterrent to the crime. When you know that there's a jail and you could be put in jail, it will get you to think twice. Should I speed? Should I drive under the influence? Should I steal? Should I attack? Should I sexually attack? Should I? It will get you to think twice. Because when you see criminals going to jail, it will make you think twice. That, you know what, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be stuck for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years of my life in a jail. So it serves as a deterrent. Number 3, it's a punishment for the criminal. If the criminal is not punished, they'll do it again and again and again. The hadith says, "Man amin al-iqab, man amin al-uquba, asa al-adab." If someone knows that he will definitely not be punished, they'll commit the crime again and again. They'll commit the sin again and again. So it serves as a punishment for the criminal. Number 4, jails and prisons are meant to be a rehabilitation place. A place for rehabilitation. That is why in some places, jails and prisons are not called as such. They are called correction facilities. Correction facilities. Why? Because what is meant is that we take the prisoner, we take the criminal, we bring him inside, and we try to correct him. We try to give him a new life, so that when he comes out again, comes back to society, he has the desire to be a productive member of society. Not to steal, not to assault, not to kill, not to murder, but to be a good member of society. It's a correction facility. This is one of the major purposes, and I'm gonna come back to this point later on, or in a bit. The whole purpose of jail is to rehabilitate. When a person comes to jail and comes out, supposedly, theoretically, there should be a new person. When a person comes out of jail, they should be embraced as a new individual, a new character. They have the desire to start new, to start a new page in their life. And number 5, prisons serve justice for the victims. If you've been a victim of assault, or you witnessed the murder of a father, a son, a parent, a sibling, a child, you want a sense of justice. You want to see the criminal get what they deserve, and prison gives you that. Although your loved one won't come back to life. If you lost a father to a murder, your father's not going to come back to life. Your son or daughter, they're not going to come back to life. But at least you feel that just some justice has been served. This person is doing the time for their crime. These are the 5 goals of prisons. Now, let's come back to prisons in the West. Prisons here in Canada, in the US, in England, in Europe. There's a major problem. Out of the 5 goals, maybe they do a good job as a punishment. Maybe they do a good job of protecting society. Maybe they do a good job of getting a sense of justice for the victims. But is there rehabilitation? Are they correction facilities? People here in the West, criminals in the West, when they go to jail, when they come out of jail, are they good people? Are they rehabilitated? Are they excellent citizens? Unfortunately, no. No. Statistics tell us that in the United States of America, 40 to 65% of released prisoners are reincarcerated within 3 years. Within 3 years, they go back to jail. They go back to prison. And this tells you that the prison didn't do anything for them. It didn't fix them. It didn't fix their problem. Otherwise, why did they go back to jail within 3 years? In the United States, most released prisoners return to a life of crime. Most of them. Over 50% of them, they go back to crimes. Thieves go back to stealing. Murderers go back to murdering. Gang members go back to their gangs, and so on and so forth. 2/3, almost 2/3 of former prisoners in the US, they go back to jail in the first couple of years after being released. Why? What is going on? What is the problem here? The problem is that these jails are not doing the role of rehabilitation. The problem is that they don't have programs in jails. One of the things that they have to have is mental health programs. A lot of these criminals, we don't know about their past. All we see them is that they committed the crime. But why did they commit the crime? We don't give them the benefit of the doubt. Why did this person murder? Maybe he was a victim. Maybe he saw his parents were a victim of murder. His son was a victim of murder. Why did they go and assault? Maybe he was a victim. Sometimes they deal with mental health, and we talked about mental health on the second night. Are there programs in jails and prisons here in Canada and the US that deal with mental health issues? Do they provide them with psychiatrists, with psychologists, with a program? Also, is there education in prisons? Is there an educational program? At most prisons, there isn't. There isn't. If there's any program, they go and they bodybuild. They lift weights. There's a gym. But is there an educational system for them where they could earn a degree? They could get a BA or a master's or a PhD. Are we providing that in jails? I'm paying $550 from tax, and you are to each and every single one of us. How many people are in this room right now? Let's add them up and then multiply that by 550. That's the amount that we're paying towards prisons. But what are we getting in return? Unfortunately, what is happening is that a lot of criminals, I'm not saying all of them, but a lot of them, they're damaged. They're damaged mentally. And I'm not saying this negatively, God knows. I'm not poking fun of them. No, I'm sympathizing. A lot of them have a bad history. They're damaged. What happens is they go into a further damaged place. They go to jail, and they see all kinds of things in jail, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. And then they come back out in society more damaged than they were in the first place. Obviously, they're going to go back to a life of crime. When they're not accepted in society, of course they're going to go to a life of crime. And another major problem in US prisons and Canadian prisons is that when you go to prison, you learn more about crimes. You end up learning more about crimes because you get to mix with a bunch of criminals. If you're one criminal, now you're eating, sleeping, drinking, you're spending your entire day, your entire night with a bunch of other criminals. You might go into jail because of tax evasion, but you come out of jail as a murderer, as a thief, as a gang member, as a drug dealer. Does that make sense? Are we fixing the problem, or are we increasing the problem? Criminals go into prison learning more about crimes than they did the day that they entered jail. And then this is in addition to the violence inside jails. Assaults, physical assaults, sexual assaults, verbal assaults. These people, they get assaulted and abused sexually, verbally, physically. The murders that happen, there's gangs in prison. What sort of environment is this? How are we correcting them? And we call them correction facilities. We're trying to improve these individuals who are by the millions. They're not just, a couple of people, a handful of people. We have millions and millions in our jails in Canada and America. They come out and they're even more dangerous because we didn't do anything for them. Right? A lot of them, they resort back to going in jail. Who's going to employ them? If you're a business owner, and someone comes to you and says, you know what, I was in jail for 5 years. Are you going to employ them? You're not going to employ them. So this person doesn't get a job here, doesn't get a job there, gets rejected. Ultimately, they're going to go back to a life of crime because this person wants to survive. He might have a family, he wants to survive. They're going to go back in jail. So once you're in jail you're in jail forever. This is the system that we live in. And there's nothing that is done about it. What we suggest, my dear friends, is that jails and prisons in the West, they need reform. They need to be changed. And they need actual programs. We need to start with educational programs. Let's give them the opportunity. Now that they're in jail, they're away from their family members, they're away from crimes, let's give them a substitute. Let them learn. Let us offer them degrees at a university. They can do long distance, but they can earn a degree so that at least when they come out of jail, they could get hired. They have something to work with. 2, religious programs. If they're a Muslim, we could work on them. If they're a Christian, if they're Jewish, we could work on them religiously. spiritually. There needs to be chaplains. And I know this exists in some countries, and I know it exists here in Canada. Chaplains, where a Muslim scholar could go to jail and provide therapy. They could provide counsel, religious counsel, spiritual counsel to these criminals, to these people in jail. We need therapists. Mental health is a number one issue in jails. They need to be provided with programs, psychologists, therapists, to see what the problem is, so that this person doesn't go back to a life of crime. وصلوا على محمد وعلى محمد. Now, you do a crime and you go to jail. But there are a lot of people that went to jail and they were innocent. A lot of people throughout history. They went to jail innocently. They were innocent. Or rather, oppressively. They were oppressed. They were framed for a crime that they never committed, and they ended up in jail. Great individuals. We have great individuals that ended up in jail. However, we see that they have something in common. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. What they have in common, these great individuals that went in jail, is that they made use of their time. They didn't waste their time in jail. They made use of their time in jail, either in supplicating to Allah, getting closer to Allah, or in spreading knowledge, or in seeking knowledge, but they made use of their time. For example, Prophet Yusuf, alayhi afdal salatu wassalam, he went to jail. For what? For a crime that he never committed. He was framed. He was wrongfully accused of assaulting the emperor's wife. And he chose to go to jail. قال رب السجن أحب إلي مما يدعونني إليه. He preferred to go to jail instead of committing adultery. And the day that he entered jail, Yusuf alayhi salam, he wasted his time. He sat idly, not doing anything. No, we see that the Quran tells us that in jail he was performing da'wah. He was calling people to Allah Azza wa Jal. يا صاحبي السجن أأرباب متفرقون خير أم الله الواحد القهار. He made use of his time in jail. His cellmates, he called them to Allah. He taught them about Tawheed. And we also see Al-Imam Musa ibn Ja'far, alayhi afdal salatu wassalam, who was put in jail. He was imprisoned for many years. And Imam Musa ibn Ja'far, he saw the worst of prisons. The prison of Sindi ibn Shahik, he could not differentiate between day and night. To that point. And he would say, Allahumma inni talama sa'altuka اللهم إني طالما كنت أسألك أن تفرغني لعبادتك وقد استجبت لي فلك الحمد على ذلك. My Lord, I always asked you to make me available for your worship. And so you put me in jail, and now I can worship you freely without any distractions. So thank you, my Lord. You see, those who are put in jail innocently, how they make use. A mu'min never wastes his or her time, even if they're in jail. Even if they're in prison, they make use of that moment, either in da'wah, or in seeking knowledge, or in worship, or in dua, or in salah. We have a scholar, a Sheikh Mahdawi Kenny. He wrote his memoirs. He mentions an interesting story in his memoirs. He says that during the time of the Shah of Iran, Shah Pahlavi, he says some of us were imprisoned. Why? Because we're Islamic activists. We worked for the Islamic Revolution. He says, for example, a Sheikh Al-Muntadhari. He mentions a Sayyid Taliqani, a Sheikh Rafsanjani, Mahdawi Kenny himself, and Mahdi Bazargan. He said we were all in the same cell. We were all in the same jail. But we had an academic schedule for us. We didn't sit, crack jokes, or tell stories, or wasted time, killed our time. No. We taught each other. So he says, for example, Ayatollah al-Muntadhari, he would teach fiqh. He taught Bahth al-Kharij, fiqh in jail, without any sources. He taught us Bahth al-Kharij. As-Sayyid Taliqani, he taught us tafsir. So they would take turns, and each one would give a lecture. One on fiqh, one on tafsir, one on philosophy. Mahdawi Kenny says, I taught philosophy, and so on and so forth. They made use of their time in jail by teaching one another. They had an academic schedule in jail. And interestingly, he says that after morning salah, Sheikh Rafsanjani, the former Iranian president, after Salat al-Fajr, he would sit and he would recite Quran in a very loud voice. And jokingly, he said, and in all honesty, his voice was really bad. He had a very terrible voice. In Farsi, he says, he had a very terrible voice. But they made use of their time in prison. One would recite Quran loudly to comfort his cellmates. One would teach fiqh, one would teach tafsir, and so on and so forth. Even Sayyid al-Khamenei, in his memoirs, he mentions that he was jailed 6 times. 6 times. This was before the revolution. And in jail, he would spend his time translating the books of Sayyid Qutb from Arabic to Farsi. And he says, I had a radio and I would look to listen to the Quran. I would listen to the Quran in jail. I would enjoy my time listening to the Quran. Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Sa'id Al-Hakim, this great scholar whom we lost last year, approximately at a time like this, on the 25th of Muharram. Sayyid Muhammad Sa'id Al-Hakim, who I had the honor of attending his classes for a couple of months in the holy city of Najaf, he was in prison in the 80s. During the time of Saddam in Iraq, he was in jail, along with a great number from the family of Al-Hakim. From this religious, scholarly family, they were in jail for over 8 years. Yet this family, they brought comfort to those who were in jail. And we're not talking about criminals. We're talking about political descendants. We're talking about those who opposed the regime of Saddam Hussein, and they were imprisoned innocently. The Hakim family, they brought them comfort. They brought them joy. As Sayyid Muhammad Sa'id Al-Hakim, he would teach Bahth al-Kharij in jail to Hawza students without having any sources. He didn't have any books. Yet he was able to teach Bahth al-Kharij. And they say that he wrote an entire book in jail using cigarette boxes. Cigarette boxes. You know, because in jail, they were able to smoke. They had small cigarette boxes. He wrote an entire book using cigarette boxes. And then he says that unfortunately, his son in his memoirs, he says that one day they came and they searched our cell. And if they were to find a note that had any religious inscriptions, it meant execution, khalas, capital punishment. So they were about to come and check on our cell. So we told them, Sayyidina, you have to dispose this book. You have to ruin this book. You have to tear it apart. He said, this book, I spent years writing it. They told him, Sayyidina, you have to rip it apart. He ripped it apart. Later, he told them that I felt when I was ripping this book apart, I felt that my son was being slaughtered in front of my own eyes. To this degree. But they witnessed and they lived through that. 8 years of prison under Saddam. But they taught and they spread knowledge. And they were a source of comfort for mu'mineen. All because they were the Shia of Ahlulbayt. Know the gift that you have, my dear brothers and sisters. The wilayah of Ahlulbayt, it's something precious because people are willing to go to jail for what they have. Alhamdulillah, we don't. This is something precious. Right? When innocent men, when innocent individuals are jailed, they rise. It builds their character. It makes you stronger. It makes you more determined. And my own grandfather, Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Sadiq Al Qazwini, I don't know if you know this or not. My grandfather, he was born in 1900, 122 years ago. On April 9th of 1980, he was a scholar in Karbala, and he did not have political activism. He didn't have any political activism. He was taken from his house without wearing his imamah, and that was the last time he was seen, 1980. And he lived to 1995 at least. That's the minimum, because we were told that in 1995 he was still alive. But he had lost his eyesight. And we don't know. When did he die? Where did he die? Where is he buried till today? And this is one story. This is one story from the prisons of Saddam Hussein. and other prisons, those that were imprisoned oppressively for no crime whatsoever. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Look at the compassion of Islam, my dear brothers and sisters. Amir al-Mu'mineen, when he was struck on his head by Ibn Muljam, what do we recite on this 22nd night? Or on the 20th night of Ramadan. Do you remember? Let me take you back to Ramadan. On the 20th of Ramadan, when Amir al-Mu'mineen was on his deathbed, and they bring him laban, they brought him milk to drink. Amir al-Mu'mineen drank, and then what did he say? خُذُوهُ لَأَسِيرِكُمْ. Take it to your prisoner. Ibn Muljam. Ibn Muljam, he just murdered you, ya Amir al-Mu'mineen. خُذُوهُ لَأَسِيرِكُمْ. He would tell them, my sons, Al-Hasan and Hussein, don't torture him. He's your prisoner, but don't torture him. Don't hurt him. Don't harm him. If I die, hit him once. The same way that he hit me once, hit him once. إِنَّمَا هِيَ ضَرْبَةٌ بِضَرْبَةٍ. Don't hit him more than that. Assalamu alayka ya Amir al-Mu'mineen. This is how you treated your prisoners. Let us see how your enemies treated their prisoners. The enemies of Ahlulbayt. How did they treat their prisoners? How did they treat Muslim ibn Aqil when he was taken as a prisoner? Muslim ibn Aqil was a prisoner. Muslim ibn Aqil was a great individual, my dear brothers and sisters. He should not be taken lightly. When he went to Kufa, Imam Hussein had written a note to the people of Kufa saying, وَأَنَا بَاعِثٌ إِلَيْكُمْ أَخِي. I am sending you my brother, وَابْنَ عَمِّي, my cousin, وَثِقَتِي مِنْ أَهْلِ بَيْتِي, and the most reliable from my family. Muslim ibn Aqil. Someone with these qualities. Imam Hussein alayhi salam sends him to Kufa. What did the people of Kufa do? How did they backstab Muslim ibn Aqil? He goes inside the masjid of Al-Kufa. The masjid is packed. It's full. He prays Salat al-Maghrib wal-Isha. He looks back and the masjid is half full. After Salat al-Isha, the masjid is empty. Muslim ibn Aqil comes and walks out in the streets of Kufa, not knowing where to go. Finally, he sits at the doorstep. At a doorstep, a lady comes out, Taw'a, this great lady. She tells him, Ya Abdullah, is there anything that I could do for you? He said, yes, bring me a cup of water. She brings him a cup of water. He drinks. She takes the cup, but he doesn't leave. She tells him, Ya Abdullah, la yasluhu laka al-julus ala babi dari. You cannot sit at my doorstep. You're a strange man. I'm a strange woman. Go back to your family. Go back to your wife and children. He told her, La ahal andi, wala ashira. I do not have a family in this country, in this city. I'm lonely. I'm a stranger. يقللها وعانا مستديرة لا أهل عندي ولا عشيرة أنا مسلم الفاقد نصيرة. As soon as she heard the name of Muslim ibn Aqil, she told him, Baby, anta wa ummi, come into my house. Muslim ibn Aqil went into the house of Taw'a, spending the night in worship and in supplicating and praying and reciting the Quran. In the middle of the night, the son of Taw'a comes back to the house. He was a soldier in the army of Ibn Ziyad. As soon as he finds out that Muslim, the one who they're looking for, he's in their house, he goes and he tells Ibn Ziyad. Immediately an army comes and surrounds the house of Taw'a, and they begin fighting with Muslim. Muslim fights fiercely, reminding them of the courage and bravery of his uncle Ali ibn Abi Talib, until finally they dug a trench. That was the only way for them to capture Muslim. They dug a trench for Muslim to fall. Muslim fell in the trench and they grabbed him. Taw'a was so sad. She was so embarrassed that this happened in her house. طاعة تنادي على السطح وش هالكسيرة ليتك حضرت تشوف يا شيخ العشي ابن عمك الموثوق طايح بالحفي، قادوه مثل الطير مكسور الجناح. صاحت يا مسلم وعظمها خجلتي في، شبيدي وانا حرمة وضعيفة ما اقدر احميك، لو يتركونك كنت فت قلبي وداويك، إن كان سلمت من قيدهم سلم على، إن كان سلمت من قيدهم سلم على. قالها يا طوع اليوم ما يحصل سلامة، وصيد كان بهالبلد طبة ويتار، قولي ترى مسلم يبلغكم سلامة، واجريك على الله والنبي سيد الكون. They bring Muslim to Dar al-Imara. They bring him to Ibn Ziyad. Ibn Ziyad tells them, take him to the roof, finish him off. They take Muslim to the roof of Qasr al-Imara. He tells them, bring me some water. They beat him to the point that they cut off his lips. He asks for some water. They bring him a bucket of water. Muslim tries to drink from the bucket, but the bucket gets filled with blood from his lips. They bring him a second bucket. The same thing happens. A third, a fourth. Finally, Muslim does not drink. It's as if Allah had destined for Muslim to have the same fate of Aba Abdullah, to die thirsty. Finally, when they're about to kill him, he said, let me pray rak'atayn. He prays, and then he looks towards Medina, and he says, Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah, ghadara bi Ahlul Kufa. Peace be upon you, Aba Abdullah. The people of Kufa have deceived me. The people had gathered, the Kufans had gathered underneath the building, waiting. What will happen to Muslim? All of a sudden they saw a headless body fall from the roof. أين المنادي ومسلما ومظلوما فيا ابن عقيل فدتك النفوس لعظم رزيتك الفادحة ولا برحتها طلات الدموع تحييك غادية رائحة لأنك لم تروى من شربة ثناياك فيها غدت طائحة يا رموك من القصر إذ أوثقوك فهل سلمت فيك من جارحة. Imam Hussein alayhi salam was in Karbala on the 8th of Muharram when the news of the murder of Muslim ibn Aqil reached to him. Imam al-Hussein was standing. When they told him that Muslim was murdered, he had to sit down. Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Imam Hussein wept for the loss of Muslim, and then he says, bring me Hamida bint Muslim. I want to talk to her. The orphan of Muslim, bring her to me. They brought him Hamida. He sat her on his lap. He brushed her head. She told him, my uncle, I see you treating me the way they treat orphans. Are you telling me something about my father? He said, Bunayya, ana abuki, wa banati akhawatuki. My daughter, now I am your father, and my daughters are your sisters. He comforted her. Now fast forward Fast forward to the day of Ashura. Imam Hussein is about to enter the battlefield. He has his armor on. He's about to enter. All of a sudden his daughter Sukaina, Abba ya Hussein, one moment, I want to tell you something. Imam Hussein stops. His daughter Sukaina comes to him. She tells him, my dear father, remember when you heard the news that Muslim had died? He said, yes, my dear daughter. Remember what you did to Hamida? Yes, my dear daughter. Remember you seated her in your lap? Yes, my father, an hour from now, who's going to sit me in his lap? My father, who's going to brush my head? يا بويا قول لا تخفي علي هذه روحتك لو بعد جاية إن كان رايح هاي هي خذني وياك ما اقدر اصبر سيطول بعدي يا سكينة فاعلمي منك البكاء إذا الحمام دهاني لا تحرقي قلبي بدمعك حسرة ما دام مني الروح في جثماني. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. Raise your hands in dua. نسألك اللهم وندعوك باسمك العلي الأعظم الأعز الأجل الأكرم يا الله. اللهم لا تدع لنا ذنبا إلا غفرته ولا هما إلا فرجته ولا عيبا إلا سترته ولا خوفا إلا آمنته ولا رزقا إلا بسطته ولا شملا إلا جمعته ولا مرضا إلا شفيته ولا غائبا إلا حفظته وأدنيته ولا حاجة من حوائج الدنيا والآخرة لك فيها رضا ولنا فيها صلاح إلا قضيتها ويسرتها يا أرحم الراحمين. ولأرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات نقرأ سورة الفاتحة مع الصلوات.